We are back on the court for the Winter 24 season in Rhode Island, and we have three returning teams, including our defending champs, Lob City, who won by the largest margin in week one of our Winter 24 season. And we're kind of going to break down all the games here on our post-game show. We have some of our analysts here as well, and get to all the action from that first opening night, where there's a lot of new faces, a lot of new players that we definitely want to get to. And kind of, break down some of our favorite teams, our favorite players, and what happened on the court with a lot going on. That's for sure. A lot going on in our new facility in Tiverton. But my name's Joey. Welcome to the post-game show. I have Colin and Ashton standing by. First, we're going to do a little shout out. So go get your merch. I have to kind of bribe, some people while I have your attention here right now in the beginning, but get your Legacy Leagues merch. The analysts over here have our polos on. They're repping as well on the show, which is great. We have t-shirts, sweatshirts, sweatpants. You guys already have the jersey and shorts if you play in the league. And also shout out C4. So we do have a sponsor this season, C4 Energy Drink and our Extend Recovery. Get that. Look at that Airheads Cherry, guys. So there's links in the description of this video for discounts for all your workout needs. Shout out to them. And actually one of the players in our Connecticut League works for them and kind of got us the connection, and they're giving us some discounts for all you guys in the league. So use those links below and shout out C4. Thank you guys so much. So let's get to those week one games and let's see where we're going to start. I mean, it's only fair to start with the overtime game, right? So week one featured an overtime game. That means it must have been close, obviously, at the end of the game to go into overtime. On court two, the Gym Rats, one of our new teams, and just a awesome team name, great logo, and a fun team that I think is going to figure a lot of stuff out kind of as the season goes on. And that goes for a lot of the new teams. But they do get the win 74-70 over Unaffiliated, another new team, a bunch of free agents there that are kind of trying to mesh with themselves as well. So we'll go to Ashton, who was on, court two last night for that game that went in overtime. Let's kind of work backwards in that one. And we are going to touch on all four games from week one. But Ashton, in that one, that fourth quarter, what was the key as it went into overtime and the Gym Rats were ultimately able to get the win? But what was the difference for them, at the end of that game and into overtime to come away with the win?
So like for the whole game, it was like I was gonna say is story of the house. Like in the beginning, it was all unaffiliated. They had the lead all the way to like halftime, and Jim Rats kept playing catch up. But then the second half, the momentum switched to Gym Rats, and then in that fourth quarter, number zero Dylan Gallagher started hitting some really clutch shots, hit a free throw, and then even in overtime had a big three that kind of like extend that lead just enough where they kind of had a comfortable lead to finish it off. And the Gym Rats, even though it did start off a little slow for them, they kind of caught up pretty quickly and they worked like a team, and it came out with the win.
Yeah, so we'll go back to Ashton in a second because I know he interviewed Brandon Whitman after the game, who mentioned that key three, from to kind of force overtime, right? To get him to that point. Brandon Whitman finished with 43 points in his debut, so a huge game from him attacking the rim and kind of doing a little bit of everything for that team. But like Ashton mentioned, according to the stats here up on our website, it was 36-24 at halftime, right? So we kind of talk about the tale of two halves, a 12-point deficit for the Gym Rats, and they nearly erased that. Well, they did actually erase it completely in the third quarter to kind of tie it up heading into the fourth, and it stayed close, and they made enough plays. So even just kind of touching on, I mean, I think we touched on both teams a little bit, Ashton. So go wherever you want from here. But Brandon Whitman was a key and kind of unaffiliated. You talked a little bit. I know that they had a standout player, Eric Fowler, who kind of led the scoring punch for that team.
Yeah, the unaffiliated had a couple of players returning from a different team over the summer. So they had two returning players, but everyone else was new faces. And Eric Fowler, he kind of surprised me. I wasn't really expecting much, but his presence in the paint was crazy. He had like at least a double double at least because he had like 10 rebounds if I could count in my head. But he had so many points. He was like their efficient guy. He was like their main guy. And the one thing I noticed was in the overtime, he was on the bench, which I don't know if you want to put your best player on the bench, but if I think he was there, it would probably been a little bit different. He did hop in, but it was a little too late by the time GM Rats had their lead. But honestly, they did look pretty good. I think it was a tough week one, but I think over time they're gonna get way better, and I can see them making a run this year.
Yeah, and this is one of those games, especially with unaffiliated, where the stats are being fixed. So if you go on the website now, we are updating those, and Eric Fowler's name will show up there. We are in the process of expanding everything, and so we have a new website, even though it looks similar for those players who have used it before. A lot of things are changing behind the scenes, and so in addition to our new analysts being thrown to the fire last night, keeping the stats and doing the live stream, some of the behind the scenes things are changing, which is exciting stuff for the league. So it's good. We'll get it fixed. Thanks for bearing with us on that. Let's get to the both games on court one were close, very close. I believe a 2 point, yeah, and a 1 point game. So they're about that's about as close as you can get for two games back to back on the same court. Let's start with the Halfway Crooks because why not? I mean, I know someone on the Halfway Crooks who's also on this show, and they get a 1 point win over the Regulators, who's a semi-returning team. Might recognize the Milkman, Justin Titsworth, and some other players on that team. Maybe not too many returning, actually, but Justin Titsworth played last year and is back with his own team. Doug Whedon, one of those players who's back. So not as many as I thought. So, but for a team that's relatively new, they kind of were always able to keep it close, as Colin and Ashton and I were talking about before we went live here. But I'll kind of throw it to him, and so he hasn't seen. So Ashton cheats, right? Because he played in the league last year, and he knew what to expect and has seen some of the players, right? Colin, your first night, right? So you can even start with that if you want, and kind of from this game, what surprised you about the league? What players stood out in this game as the Halfway Crooks were able to get a 1 point win, and a lot of new faces on both teams. But Colin, what stood out to you?
So this game was very different than the first game that I watched because the first game was way more on defense side. I can tell from the first, 4 minutes that the Halfway Crooks were just run. They're just shooting. They're out. I think you guys went on it was like 15-5 run just to start the game, and I can tell you guys are running the court very well. And once you guys they called a timeout after that run, and the Regulators they figured it out. They saw that number 0 for the Crooks. His name's Ethan Austin. He was kind of cherry picking after the shot would go up. He would go up to the half court and sprint out. So then they would send out Justin. I think it was Justin number 3 for the Regulators. He would kind of follow him. So that was big for them because if they didn't stop that, I thought it was going to be a blowout from the start. But then Justin actually, whenever the 3 was needed, he was there to deliver, and it was fun to watch because I thought it was just going to be another defensive showdown again. But it was fun to watch. And there were some crazy plays too. It was flashy. It was fun.
Yeah, and that's the second game, and we're going to talk about that first game in a second, where it was a slugfest, are my words, before we came on the air. But as far as the Halfway Crooks, and of course, it's never, never easy for my team, right? Especially when we decide to not play defense for 37 and a half minutes, which was very well known from our perspective. But let me go over some stats really quick. Justin Titsworth led the team with 24 points and 6 made threes, and yeah, was hitting a lot of them kind of to keep the Regulators in it during those moments that Colin talked about, right, where the Halfway Crooks were trying to kind of get some fast break points, kind of try to build that lead and get it to 10 or 12 and kind of start to pull away. And then it was a 3, and a we would close out too hard on him, and then he would find someone else for a layup, and it's like back to a tied game, right? So everything was kind of going through him. And for the Halfway Crooks, Charles Correa. So a lot of familiar faces for the Halfway Crooks on different teams last year. So, Charles Correa himself made 5 threes and was the only one to make a 3 for the Halfway Crooks. He's played in this league multiple seasons before this, right? So not as much of an adjustment for him. And he's a great player on other teams and was able to kind of fit right in. You talked about Ethan Austin with some dunks, some jumpers as well, and did his thing. And Devin Devampino, we're going to fix his stats, but he jersey issue on my fault. Of course, I messed it up for my team. So you might see Mark Belleville on the stats, a former Boom Shakalaka member. Shout out Mark, who was actually unable to make it this season for us. But Devin Devampino with 21 points and only 3 rebounds, but that feels like not a lot, but he did foul out, right? So I kind of want to go back to Colin on this before we kind of wrap up this game. A 1 point game. the Crooks had the lead for most of the final minute or two, which took freaking forever for a regular season game because it was fouling and missed free throws, and then the other team would make a shot, and now we're tied again. And so really the last couple minutes, Colin, even if it's brief, but what kind of happened there, and again, the halfway Crooks escaped the, free throw line contest, right? But what happened in the final minute?
So it was back and forth where they couldn't, the regulators couldn't cut the lead down from, they were always down 3, and then they would get a quick layup or a quick dunk. They were never going for that game tying shot. They had 30 seconds left. I remember they gave up a good look for a 3 for a wide open dunk. So there was around 25 seconds left. There's another foul. So they were down by 1 again, and their plan actually worked because the halfway Crooks, they had made a free throw and the missed one. So they were down by 2, and I forget who scored, but they tied up the game with around, I think it was less than 10 seconds left. And I think that Justin, he was unaware of the score, and he fouled when it was a tie game, but he had thought they were down by 1. So that's what really, that was crucial for them. And it was sad to see, but it might have been a problem with the scoreboard. I'm not sure what happened, but yeah, it was very close all to the final play.
Yeah, and then even after that foul, so very well done. Even after that foul in a tied game, I believe we split the free throws, and then the regulators ended up getting fouled, which we joked with the refs after that the player fell down, but that's okay. But I think he missed, I mean, possibly 4 free throws there at the end, because they got 2 free throws there. They got an offensive rebound and fouled again. So just a lot of chances both ways for both teams. And I think if these teams were to meet again, it would be a close game, but I'm sure it would look different. Is kind of a really good place to leave it. So the halfway Crooks improved to 1-0, and every win is tough in the league, which you will see. I'm the head cheerleader of that phrase, because of how many of these games I've been involved in and how it is tough to win. And other teams start to realize that, like, oh yeah, like getting a win is like a relief, and it's not easy. So you take any of them you can get, and that's for sure. So let's get to the defending champs who have done enough winning in this league for everybody, that's for sure. But Lob City took care of business, as we talked about in the open, won by 35 points over the Air Mambas, and again, facing a team that was coming back, but just too much for Lob City, with about half of their team being some newer players and featuring Joe Secator, who we will talk about as the leading scorer from this game, just to make sure that we get those stats right. We are fixing that. So Ashton, all the stats in there for number 8 are for Joe Secator. So he did lead the way for Lob City with 35 points in his debut for Lob City. Colin Burns right behind him with 24. We'll kind of go a little maybe quicker on these last 2 games. So kind of one question for Ashton on this one, and then we'll get to that slugfest and Colin, and we'll eventually wrap this up. So as far as Lob City, more of the same from what we expect from them. Fast-paced highlights, not necessarily always a blowout, but the first quarter 25-10, right? So you blink and you're down double digits, and then it's twice as hard to come back in a game like that against a team like Lob City. So I know you've seen enough of them and you've played against them, and Ashton, let's get it out there. You've been on the wrong end of highlights that Lob City has been featured in. But in this game against the Air Mambas, even if we talk about that first quarter and kind of the game as a whole, was it more of the same? What did they do in that first quarter?
So that whole first half, was just basically Lob City being Lob City, kind of like they're making the highlight plays, they're playing amazing defense. They still played amazing defense in the second half, but they kind of also got with Air Mambas, they were cold in that first half. And if you actually look in the score sheet and you see the quarter points, they actually scored a lot better in the second half. So if they played a whole game like that, this game would have been a lot closer. So the Air Mambas were actually in it all the way through, I felt like, despite the fact it was a 35-point game. But even without Jose, who was their best player over the summer, they still looked really good. And to be honest, talking to some other players in the league that played against them before, some like Devin Pina, talking to him after his game, he's like, they look better without Jose. And to be honest, I agree. From playing against Jose and then watching them last night, it looked a lot better. But Jose's still a great player, but they look great. And Joe fits in perfectly. He fills that role. He was very athletic. He made some nice dunks last night. They're basically where they left off. They did not leave their suitcase behind. And just to hit on the Air Mamas a little bit, Mario did start off cold. but he started to hit towards the end, and they just kind of came back. It felt like if you just took that second half, it's a lot closer game. I do like what I see from Air Mambas.
Yeah, just to kind of give some stats on this one. So, I mean, 62% shooting from the floor for Lob City. We talked about Joe Secator leading the game and his team with 35 points and 3 threes. So he picked up right where he left off from last year. We talked about Colin Burns, Nuri Mahmoud. They had some newer players. Cody Crawford 0 for 7. So, we'll talk. I mean, I shot it horribly as well. So we all can, shed off the rust in that one. Speaking of that, Mario Valerio, like you talked about, 2 for 7 himself, only 6 points. And the Air Mambas led by Luis Ramirez with 19 in his debut. And yeah, I mean, even looking at the rebounds there, that 27 to 24. But when Lob City's not missing, that kind of skews that, not missing as much, right? That skews that rebound number a little bit. We will talk plenty about Lob City and kind of what needs to happen to stay in a game with them. And especially this season, that may be adjusted a little bit based on, the team they have this season. So the champs back again, 1-0 as expected, and score 95 and on opening night. And yeah, next week they get the regulators. So we'll kind of preview week 2 briefly, but let's get to this last week 1 game that we teased a ton as a slugfest, mainly because of the score. I mean, 40 to 38, in a normal rec league game is probably, still a defensive battle, but especially in the legacy leagues, not something that we see a lot of, to be totally honest. I mean, usually it's, 60 and 70 on a bad night, just because of the pace and the space and, the way we play 4-on-4. So, for a 40 to 38 game, and, as far as, always, they have some returning players. And this is kind of who I was thinking of before: Terrence Gallo, Ade Bright, Luis Ortiz. On there is actually Corey Strickland, who some of you may remember from the Boston Blazers throwback. So he's played in the league before as well. So they have some returning players and still are on the wrong end of a week 1 result to a brand new team, the Road Dogs, who, I'm sure did some things that were impressive. And let's turn it over to Colin here, kind of talking about the Road Dogs a little bit and what they did to get the win in a very, very, very close game. But it was their first game in the league as a whole. So, touch on both teams, but especially the Road Dogs getting that win.
Yeah, the biggest thing I saw out of the Road Dogs is that they were played far more together and far more balanced than I saw out of the All Waves, just because, All Waves leading scorer was Bright, and he had 19 points, in the second leading scorer he only had 4 points, which is number 2. But then if you look at Road Dogs, it's so evenly balanced. You go, the leading scorer had 10 and number 11, and it goes 8, 6, 5, and 5. So they all played very evenly and balanced, and their energy on the bench completely unmatched. All Waves completely unmatched, and all around it's just very defensive. And they did a better job stopping the fast break, I think, and they got out in transition more than All Waves. But I just think when it comes to All Waves, their second and third guy needs to step up more, and I think that if Bright creates some more space for his teammates, I think they'll get better looks and he'll get some more assists, because he did have 0 assists. But he did lead the way at 19 points. So yeah, and Road Dogs, they're tough. They play tough defense, so they'll be tough to beat.
Yeah, and I'll kind of go over some more of the stats in a second, but the Road Dogs will take on unaffiliated next week. I'll get to week 2 in a second. We'll kind of give you all the matchups, but for the Road Dogs, Jalen Ardrey with 10 points, like you talked about. Anthony Lyons, the captain, who did the interview, with 8 points, and really touched on kind of how unique it is in this league and that adjustment, period when I talked with him after the game. So, again, a win's a win and everybody will take it. But, we talked about Ade Bright with 19 and Terrence Gallo with 4 for All Waves. And so really, the difference is going to be that field goal percentage. I mean, Road Dog shot 54% to 40% for All Waves, and they, the 3-pointers weren't going either way. And then really the other thing that stands out, and we'll move on here, but is the turnovers. So I think that's really, Road Dog shot it better, right? Nearly 55% from the floor, and had 5 more turnovers. And that kind of keeps it, even, right? Little more even, and kind of got us to that 2-point result in week 1. All right. So let me, I usually would share my screen. Not doing it. We're gonna keep it on me today. But week 2 matchups really quick, and then we're gonna do our final question and get out of here. But as far as week 2, we talked about Lob City taking on the Regulators. It will be the Halfway Crooks and All Waves. And then at 9 o'clock, the Air Mambas and the Gym Rats, which I think, if we had a game of the week pick, it might be that one. Air Mambas trying to bounce back and some of the talent they have against the Gym Rats, but we can debate that another time. And then Road Dogs and Unaffiliated. So those are your week 2 matchups. Rather than make picks, let's kind of focus on some of the players in the league, especially some of the newer players, but your answer doesn't necessarily have to be a newer player. So I'll give our audience the full disclosure. This is not a completely surprise question, but next week it will be, where I will not warn the analysts ahead of time what my, surprise question will be. But this week, what player that we really didn't talk about yet from the 2 games each of you guys saw stood out? Okay, so I'll kind of give you a second to think about that. But, we touched on a lot of the leading scorers and we talked about some of the players that, hit a big shot, right? In that game for the Gym Rats, right? To kind of escape. So maybe it could be him because I don't think he scored a ton of points, but players like that had a huge impact in week 1 that you kind of want to give a shout out. So we'll go back to Ashton just to kind of keep rotating. So Ashton first, your standout player from week 1.
I'm gonna have to take Dylan Gallagher. I know he did end up dropping 18 points, but he showed out to be like a huge X factor. He did start off a little slow. He was missing some shots, but in the second half, when he started catching that fire, it just changed everything. The huge 3 towards the end of the game, the 2 big free throws, the make sure it went to overtime. He's the clutch player, and I think he's gonna keep being this X factor. This team's gonna be pretty good this year.
Yeah, and we mentioned him, but Dylan Gallagher, 18 points, 4 threes, and 6 of 12 from the floor. So shot it very well in his debut, and is going to be it looks like a big part of that team, as Brandon Whitman we talked about, and Dylan Gallagher seem to be, and Ashton can kind of nod his head if I'm right, kind of like the 2 leading creators and leaders for that Gym Rats team, and Ashton agrees. So perfect. Colin, your standout player from the other court in week 1.
I'm gonna have to go with Tommy McSparran from the Regulators. He shot 8 of 10 from the field. He shot 80% while also having 6 assists. He started the game pretty slow, and he had a few rim out, and I can see him. He got a little frustrated, but once he has a really good touch around the rim, and he knows his role. He kicks and shoots to the shooter because he went 0 for 1 from 3, and he also had 5 offensive rebounds, which is crazy. He led the whole game with offensive rebounds while also having 8. He had 3 more defensive rebounds. So if he had 4 more assists and 2 more rebounds, he would have had a triple double. And he was doing a great job facilitating for the guys around him. And yeah, he did pretty good.
Yeah, he'll be a player to watch next week for sure, and in weeks to come for that team. Tommy McSparran, 16 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists. And I just have to say, while I'm back on this box score, of course, it's about my game. 10 rebounds for the Halfway Crooks as a team, 20 for the Regulators. It felt like they out-rebounded us. It didn't feel like 20-10, but maybe they did. Maybe they did. They definitely out-rebounded us, which is a problem. For a team that isn't significantly bigger. That's a conversation for a different day. All right, so week 2 will be next Tuesday. We touched on those matchups, but this week, just so you guys know, we'll have top plays coming out. We'll do our power rankings every week, especially starting this week, and let's get it on record now so I can send people this video. The power rankings are not the standings. The standings are on our website, and those are in order by record. The power rankings are a little more opinion, not always correct. Sometimes done to create some controversy. I'll be honest, within reason. But it's to have fun, and kind of rank the teams. If they were to play today, who would win, right? Based on how the team is playing today. So again, throughout the season, it kind of varies, and the middle of the power rankings usually are a little different than you might see in the standings. So just to get that on the record, we'll have our photo albums up on Facebook. The interviews are up on Facebook now that we were kind of referencing in this post-game show. And we'll have graphics and more stuff throughout the week. And we'll get it ready for next week to do it all over again on Tuesday in Tiverton. So guys, Ashton and Colin, good job on your guys' first show. And thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you back on the court on Tuesday.